What is something about yourself that sounds totally made up but is 100% real? My mom bought my brother and I a Sega, then every night after we went to bed she would play Sonic. As a kid, I thought she just loved playing games. As I got older, I realized she only did it so that when we asked her for help she'd be able to. A few years ago for her birthday, I got her a Sega with Sonic and Sonic 2. I bought everything from the Sonic Edition Sega, just the box, no special skins back then, and everything that came in it. I spent months getting every individual piece, including the books, and I had to buy nearly everything separately because they aren't exactly producing them anymore, and people didn't exactly stock up on them as collectibles back in the day. By her birthday, I had it all assembled, some of it nearly in tatters due to age and wear and tear, but I did it. She loved it, and then about a month later, I saw the full set in near pristine condition for sale on eBay, not her or hers, and for about 1/10 of what I had paid to assemble my mom's tattered set. Still the favorite gift I've given. I died first, and then was born. I've told this story a few times on Reddit, but I enjoy telling it, so here we go again. During the cesarean to bring me into the world, there was some major complication on my mother's end. She started bleeding internally, drowning me in the womb. When I was removed, the doctors tried to get me breathing but couldn't. I was declared dead. My mother was still unconscious, but my dad was brought in to say goodbye to me. He held me in his arms, was saying goodbye when out of nowhere I started coughing up blood and screaming as babies do. Apparently, it was the weirdest moment in his life, being abjectly terrified and overwhelmed with joy that I was alive. It's my favorite story to tell because weirdly it takes some pressures off on birthdays. I don't do well with too much attention by family and friends, but celebrating my death day doesn't bring people the same connotations. My dad's name is Luigi and my uncle's name is Mario. They're brothers. Edit. I forgot to add that my dad is also a plumber. I grew up on the wrong side of the river, was considered by all to be the town loser, and went to work as a janitor while still in high school. Then, in my 40s, I set a goal for myself, while still working full-time, to take one class at a time until I either graduate or die, whichever comes first. At age 49, I finished my Bachelor's of Science degree. At age 52, my MBA, and age 61, my PhD. Never let the arrogant elitists define who you are or what you can be. I never graduated high school, but I have a bachelor's degree. I was homeschooled and my mom never went through the legal steps to actually get me a real diploma, so she made me one in Photoshop that was then used to get me into this podunk community college that didn't verify it. From there, I got my associate's degree, which I then used to get into a decent university where I got my bachelor's. I was once sponsored by the Crunk Energy Drink Company for sailing. I imagined I was the only sailor on their list. I literally just emailed them saying that I sailed and asked if they wanted me to put stickers on my boat. They sent me a few cases of the drink, t-shirts, hats, the works. My car was known as a Crunkmobile. That's badass. My great-grandma ran a brothel back at the turn of the 20th century. She was Algonquin, and people were pretty racist back then, so she had a hard time getting business. Since it was a coastal town, Maine, she bought up a couple leaky old rowboats and would load them up with hookers and booze and row them out to the ships at night. When ships came into port, most of the crew would get shore leave and hit the bars and brothels in town, but they always had to leave a few sailors on the ship to keep an eye on it. My great-grandmother figured those guys had money too and probably felt left out. She basically set up water-based lot lizards, or Uber hoes. My grandpa and his sisters grew up in the brothel, and no one would talk to them or socialize with them. My grandpa met my grandma picking green beans for a local farmer. They fell in love. When they wanted to get married, they had to leave the state to get away from her family that were utterly disgusted that she would marry the son of a whore. So they ran off to Detroit because GM was hiring, and that's how my family came to Michigan. I'm allergic to lettuce. I carry an EpiPen allergic. My great-grandfather worked in the textile business and started importing rayon fabric from Japan in the late 60s and 70s. Keep in mind, this was during the early days of synthetic fabrics and traveling to Japan was not all that common. On a business trip, he met some Japanese businessmen who were selling newly designed transistor radios. His contacts wanted to set up an exclusive import agreement for their electronics to North America, but my great-grandfather declined, because how many of those radios could you possibly sell? Turns out that was a short-sighted business decision, because that company was called Sony Electronics. He turned down the exclusive import contract for Sony. On the other side of my family, my Canadian relatives walked away from 100 acres of land in Alberta during the Dust Bowl and Great Depression. They decided it was not worth paying the taxes on their land. Turns out that land was right in the heart of the Alberta oil deposits. Also, on my mother's side of the family, they used to have a citrus orchard near Los Angeles. They sold it cheap to some land developers. That farm was right at Hollywood and Vine. My family on both sides is bad at seeing long-term investments. I was at a store when Tony Hawk was signing autographs. I was only 10 at the time and was a huge fan. One of his early video games had just come out. The store had a couple TVs on the wall and some video games to play. Being a kid, I waited for one controller to open up and someone to leave. A kid ended up leaving and I grabbed the controller and started playing and minding my own business. A couple minutes later, the store wanted to grab photos of Tony playing his own video game. He came over and grabbed the second controller and began to play multiplayer with me. Probably played for 10 minutes. The bonus was it was also my 10th birthday. So I played Tony Hawk Pro Skater with Tony Hawk. Edit. Wow, I made this comment and didn't return to Reddit until just now. Was not expecting it to be that big of a hit. Thank you. I do not have photos of myself playing the game with him, but I believe my parents have a couple of photos of me with him and getting his autograph. I still have the signed board on my wall. Once in college, I applied for a job at the library help desk. I figured I would help people find books. Didn't give it much more thought than that. During the interview, I aced all of the customer service questions. Then they asked me whether I knew how to defrag a hard drive. Cue alarm bells in my head, but I kept calm outwardly and said no, but you can teach me. I worked in IT for 3 years by accident. They were too nice to fire me. I took my mother for a surprise trip to NYC. She got married to my father there in '68. The surprise was manufactured by way of telling her we were going to Australia. We live in New Zealand, so a trip to Australia is not a huge deal. It's the type of thing you could do for the weekend. And therefore, she packed a bag and brought her passport. We got to the airport and said, "Surprise, we're going to New York," and she cried her eyes out with delight. When we arrived on our first morning, I said, "Okay, what do you want to do?" She said, "When I was last here, in 1968, the Twin Towers weren't complete, so I'd like to go to the top of them." "Your wish is my command," I said, and off we went to the World Trade Center. That was the afternoon of September 10th, 2001. Suffice it to say, there was a particular poignancy when we looked out the window at around 8 a.m. the next morning. I sneeze when I think of every single time. My wife likes to give me if I just sneeze innocently. She thinks she's a riot. Edit. Judging by all the Me Too comments, this isn't as unheard of as I thought. If you sneeze because of don't worry, you're still free, but you're not alone. Spent a really cool day in London with Christian Slater and his mom. His mom is adorable. Christian Slater is adorable as well. One of my ancestors was dumb and bought one of Napoleon's doorknobs. It turns out it's fake. Doorknobs were invented after Napoleon died. I'm intrigued by the fact that this is a story that your family decided to pass on from one generation to the next, far enough to lose track of the relation and just refer to the subject as ancestor. My husband, I'm 30, has been my best friend since I was 7. He was the new kid at school and I walked up to him and said, "We are going to be best friends." He said, "No we aren't, leave me alone." I bugged him every day for 2 weeks before he finally said, "If I'll be your friend, will you shut up about it?" We were married 20 years later, proved his wrong. I got hernia by sneezing too hard. I got mine trying to match my wife's pregnant belly. I feel sorry for laughing. What a way to get it. I was a rocket scientist. I worked on the 114-AGM. The science was verifying rocket bodies. The backbone of science is to repeat experiments. My job was to make sure we were gonna get the same result every time. People call me a liar all the time because the idea of a rocket scientist is von Braun. My grandpa left his royal status to marry my grandma. When I was a kid, I woke up to find my cat giving birth to her kittens on my pillow, 1 inch from my face. I took it as a compliment. My great-great-grandfather was a Pinkerton detective, acted on vaudeville, and had 5 wives in 2 different states that knew nothing of each other. He also slightly changed his last name each time and never got caught until an ancestry website happened, LOL. Sounds a bit like my great-grandfather. He had a wife in France and then 2 in the US in neighboring counties. He was caught though. My great-grandmother was wife number 2. She found out about wife number 3 and divorced him. No one knew about the first wife in France until I pulled his service records from World War II. I lost my heel in a lawnmower accident. Edit. Here's the story. I was 4 at the time, and I won't say who exactly did it, but he was mowing and it was a riding mower, and there's a hitch at the back where you can hook a little trailer. I left to stand on that part and ride. Well, this time I saw a frog in the grass, and being the 4-year-old I was at the time, I jumped off the mower and onto the grass and put my hands over the frog to catch it, and he didn't realize I had jumped off and he backed up. I had my tongue surgically enhanced for more reach and flexibility when I was 8. Edit. I'm super jazzed by how many of us are out there. I bought a guitar amp from Brad Whitford of Aerosmith when I was 17. He and Steven Tyler served up cheeseburgers for me and my friends. Edit. As requested. So, Brad's son was a punk and I knew him from the scene. I was in a band that had some small local marginal success. This is 97-98 in Boston. I needed a new amp for our first US tour but had very little money. I was getting drunk with his son and on a whim, I asked him if his dad had any amps laying around that he didn't need. We laughed and carried on partying. The next day, I get a call at my home. It was Mr. Whitford himself. He was super nice but to the point. My son says you got a band and need a good rig for your Les Paul. I have something in mind for you. Just gotta have my guy get it from the warehouse. Come by my house in Norwell this weekend and check it out. That was the gist of the call. Obviously, the whole band came with me, and our roadie. We get to his house and it's totally him. So weird. These guys were like gods in Boston. I wasn't the hugest fan, but knew him from his work with Wayne's World. He takes me to one of his garages, where there's this cool full stack. The brand is Bedrock, an old company from New Hampshire that made good quality amps in the 80s. This one was custom made for Brad. Basically, Marshall components. 4 tubes. All the knobs go to 11, not kidding. Still, it has the property of Aerosmith stickers on it. He plugs it in and rips a crazy solo on his Les Paul, and then hands it to me and I play a couple power chords. He asks for $300 for the whole thing. I pay him and he tells his son to give us a tour of the house. This is where it gets nuts. It's just like you expect. Tons of gold records, platinum records, pictures of him with people like John Lennon, Robert De Niro, and Joey Ramone. Then we get to see his studio and the largest collection of Marshall amps in the world. Seriously, like 200 cabs, a wall of guitars. Guitars so pretty and amps so cool, it made sense for him to find the one he sold me dispensable. After the house tour, he told us to meet him at the little bar and grill they own in town. When we get there early and he arrives 30 minutes later with Steven Tyler in tow. You guys the punk group? He was so nice. They went in the back and came out with burgers for us all on the house. Then they straight up left. Irish goodbye to even. I still have the amp. I used it on the road for almost 10 years in 5 bands. Now, it's just a conversation piece. But it still works. I'll crank her up every now and then. At age 50, and with limited to no video game experience, my mother completed Mario 64 before I did, in about half the time it finally took me to do it. I built a 13-foot tall T-Rex with Christopher Walken's head. A New York magazine called it highbrow and brilliant. I once drove a locomotive backwards through the Canadian Rockies. I have won an actual WWE match. Edit. For everyone that is asking, I did not have a stage name. It was a one-time deal. It was during the 2006 tribute to the troops. The guy I faced was Chris Masters. Proof. Obviously, I'm the dude in uniform. My hair is not as beautiful as it is now. It was short because I was in the army. My brother is 31. I'm 19. And when he was born, his grandmother, we don't share the same father, bought him a NES. My mother, not knowing what to do with it, turned it on and played Super Mario Bros. She spent 2 months every day trying to beat the game, even buying a strategy guide to go through it. She beat the game and never touched a video game again. I can smell some illnesses and chronic symptoms. My sense of smell is normally pretty average, but I can sometimes smell if a person is sick before they start showing symptoms. And I've been able to identify/predict 2 seizures, a diabetic blood sugar drop, and multiple chronic migraines before they happened. A pelican engulfed my head with its massive beak when I was a small child. Pelicans are pelican. I won 2 TV game shows. The $10,000 Pyramid won $10,300 in 1975, and Sale of the Century was on the show for 9 days, won $34,000 in cash and prizes in '85. Arrested and spent 3 days in a holding cell for a crime that I didn't commit, about a year after the whole matter was done and dusted with. Mind you, I say didn't commit the crime, but I was involved in the story from start to finish. What was the crime you were accused of? My wife, then girlfriend, and I eloped. We crossed over 3 states in India over a 5-day period to get married. My father-in-law, then mortal nemesis, is a well-connected man. He got in touch with his contacts in the police department to try and get a hold of us and filed a formal complaint as part of due process. Long story short, we got married. The rather inept police couldn't find a couple of 21-year-olds. Over the next 4 months, all of it was sorted out. First, we were vilified. Then the parents were mollified, etc., etc. But, in the beautiful ending to that story, my father-in-law forgot to retract his complaint. Proceed to our first wedding anniversary, and we were taking a flight out of the country for a celebratory vacation. From Bombay Airport, India, to Dubai Airport, the United Arab Emirates. I was flagged at immigration and was taken across to a cell where I was duly arrested. My crime? Kidnapping. I was being accused of having kidnapped the lady I was now married to. Taken to a cell, whilst my wife tried to explain the misunderstanding. One of a cop told her, "Madame, don't worry, we know how Stockholm Syndrome works. You are safe now," etc. And this was on a Friday evening. Due judicial process was followed and I was released by the judge on the following Monday. Hell of a story to share with people when we include all the details of the planning and execution. Edit. We marked our 10th anniversary on the 12th of this month, and the 9th anniversary of me getting my ass hauled to jail. I'm glad you're okay, and frankly I'm glad that Stockholm Syndrome is at least taken seriously, albeit disastrously applied. I once successfully ran an unfunded shelter for about 100 homeless veterans, as a homeless civilian. How did this come to be, if I may ask? I lost my job in housing in early 2017. I'd been homeless before and slept rough on the streets, although that was in California where the weather was at least bearable. This time, I was living in North Dakota, and I'd seen what the winters were like. I figured if I was going to have to sleep on the streets again, I'd better move somewhere where I didn't have to contend with hypothermia for a good part of the year, so used the last of my money to relocate to Arizona. I had a totally impractical plan of finding work and then housing within a few weeks before my remaining funds ran out. But the deadline came and went, and I found myself on the streets again. A homeless advocate I'd reach out to tried to get me sheltered at a place for homeless veterans, but being a civilian, they turned me away. Aforementioned advocate reached an accommodation with the veterans by setting up an overnight shelter for homeless civilians next door that I would run for him. In exchange, I would be allowed to sleep on their property, outside the walls, use their facilities like showers and bathrooms, and join in their communal meals if they had enough food. Because the civilian shelter was an overnight thing, I really didn't have much to do or anywhere to go in the day, so I spent more and more time with the vets. I took it on myself to help them with odd jobs like security, packing lunches for the local homeless, who didn't/couldn't live with them, to come and get, unloading donations from concerned citizens, and security, fire watch, while the camp slept at night. I soon became the camp's unofficial official cook, which was awesome because I love cooking and it was a challenge cooking meals for so many people so quickly, using an outdoor kitchen with bare bones facilities. I gradually began to take on more responsibilities with the vets, and the overnight shelter was more like a side gig. The vets repeatedly asked me to move into the walls and stay with them, making me full-time, but I refused at first because I felt like it would be letting down the guy who I was running the overnight shelter for. I woke up one day to see the vets dismantling the tent we used for the overnight shelter, and one of them wryly asked me, "Where are you going to stay now?" I moved in with the guys later that day. A couple months later, the incumbent base commander and his family had secured housing for themselves, and he didn't ask as much as tell me I would be taking over for them. They had thought about who was going to take on the job after they left and decided I was apparently the only one fit for the role, due to my diligence and enthusiasm for helping my newfound friends. Not gonna lie, there were parts of it that were tough and really grated. I felt like I had to constantly prove myself to the big swinging mentality of veterans who felt that as a veterans camp it should have been run by a vet. I was also just as homeless as my men. We had nothing but tent fabric to protect us from the elements, sometimes little food or water, and constant issues with the local tweakers and criminal elements of the homeless. But helping these people get off the streets and are reunited with their families is hands down one of the most fulfilling things I've ever done in life. When my mom was in grad school, she took several labs where she worked with cadavers. Because my dad worked nights, she often had to take me to class with her, and she'd usually just plonk me down on the table with the cadaver while she worked on it. "Can I go to work with you?" Over my dead body. Hey guys, thank you for listening to another one of my videos. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and share some of your own stories in the comments.